The unavailability of locomotives because of certain challenges, the procurement of critical spare parts, all these factors are issues that we've been working with them on collaboratively with government to try and get faster pipelines on access to spare parts, et cetera, et cetera. And so we are working on each of the export channels, and we're trying to get the export channels working at a better level. On the Eskom side, clearly running energy availability factors of less than 60% is not in the country's interest, but we also have worked closely with Eskom to try and see what we can do. But from our particular perspective, the 100 megawatt license-free cap is obviously a step in the right direction. We have a lot of work going on at the moment in looking at how we can reduce the time that it takes to get the environmental authorizations done. At the moment, environmental authorizations for a renewable energy project take 18 months, which is kind of like crazy when you've already got a mining EMP and you should be able to piggyback off the existing EMP. We've got a 210-day grid tie connection process which with Eskom. Eskom have now agreed to reduce that by half, so we're working with them on getting that done. And then we are encouraging the DMRE through the NERSA process to make sure that we have registration light, because on the registration site we still, and we've got some companies that are making some good progress. If you look at Goldfields, for example, their South Deeps operation, they basically are putting in one solar panel a minute, obviously during daylight hours. And they've got agreement from NERSA to increase that project to 60 megawatts. That's a practical example of a project that's actually happening. And as the industry, we've got slightly more than around about 4 gigawatts of current agreed projects that companies are going to invest in. But and that's a 65 billion rand investment. And we think that that's going to increase quite substantially over the next period in terms of other industries coming on board. And we do have a lot of engagement with the Electricity Intensive Users Group, with FAPA, the Ferro Alloy Producers Association, and combined we consume more than 50% of South Africa's electricity, and we are very much looking at how we can supplement supply using renewables, wind and a few others. There are some big constraints. Let me just put one on the table. The National Transmission Network has some significant constraints from Northern Cape, Western Cape, Eastern Cape, where the wind and obviously solar can be located. So that's why Eskom has been looking at how they can enable more solar plant, for example, to be done at existing power stations. And that's a particular process that we all are looking at. There is quite a bit of work being done, and we've been engaging government on the legal separation taking place within Eskom itself between transmission, generation, distribution. This should have been done 24 years ago when the Energy Policy White Paper was first done, but looking at Hillary's face, things do take time sometimes, Hillary, but we're making progress there. And there is a lot of ongoing engagement with Eskom, including sharing of technical capability, because in the mining sector we do have significant capability in the sector. On the Fraser Institute survey, we fell to the 10 worst, in the bottom 10 of the Fraser Institute rankings in their annual survey, which obviously is deeply disappointing. What is interesting is that we went back to our membership to ask the members who actually completed the survey, and not a single one of our members was involved in completing the survey, not one, from what we've got back from a feedback perspective so far. So it's quite interesting to see a survey about South Africa which doesn't include South Africa in the numbers. They have a 17% response rate. They send responses to 2,000. 17% response rate. They send the survey to 2,000 companies, but they're mostly exploration companies around the world, and most of the exploration companies are not located in South Africa. So that's something that we agreed yesterday with the minister, that we will, and I want to use the words very carefully, set up a task team, not another bloody task team. We're going to set up a task team to focus on the 18 key measures in the Fraser Institute survey to understand where South Africa is coming. And we've said that there are areas where there are challenges. For example, we were rated last from a security perspective, and we agree that there are some serious security issues that we're dealing with as South Africa, but we can get into that a bit later. We currently account for less than 1% of global exploration expenditure. We were obviously disappointed that that the government took so long to produce the exploration plan. We're still involved in a detailed discussion on the plan itself, because there obviously are gaps in it, and we still within the comment period within which we can provide inputs to government. So I can't share with you just yet some of our very specific concerns, but we will do that in due course. Let me move on to climate change. We have, as the Minerals Council, issued a statement on climate change. We have agreed and aligned ourselves with the International Council on Mining and Metals position of zero net greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 or earlier on Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. Scope 3 is a lot more difficult. We are working quite closely on those issues. There's been a lot of work around the just energy transition. And I think it's very important for us to put on the table that a just energy transition has to be just. We have to have energy security. And we need to be able to make sure that South Africa's developmental objectives are done. We need what is defined as a common but differentiated approach. And so countries do have to be differentiated based on their own developmental needs. You can't just expect South Africa to just suddenly switch off its coal-powered fleet, but over time coal will become a smaller component. But at the moment coal remains a significant component. 80% of our current electricity requirements being met by the coal side. And during the conference we will have a number of presentations. Nick Lusufi, our senior executive responsible for environment legacies, is going to be providing some inputs in a couple of the panels. So Nick's no pressure on you on that one. We've talked about our energy contributions on the renewable side. That's 4 gigawatts, 65 billion value, and we'll see how those unfold over the period. On communities, we saw 3 billion rands worth of investment through social and labour plans in communities in 2021 versus 2.3 billion in each of the previous 2 years. Alex Kumalo, our head of social performance, is here. Any questions on the social performance of the industry? We did have a few challenges in executing projects because obviously during the COVID lockdown, movement of people, etc., was difficult, but lots of positive work done in that particular space. This year marks the 10-year anniversary of the Marikana tragedy, in which 44 people were killed, and clearly a lot of work has been done there by Sibanye Stillwater as the owner of the Lonmin assets, where obviously the events transpired, and they've obviously had an annual commemoration of the events, and they've developed a Marikana renewal program, a 3-pronged strategy around renewal, honouring and restitution to shape the legacy of Marikana, and I'm sure you'll see a lot more coming out of that particular process. Just to highlight to all of you that all the companies worked with all the widows from that particular event, and there's 139 beneficiaries of youngsters in particular who've gone to university, and some 50 million rand has been spent on education of these youngsters beyond secondary school level. On the mine security side, just to say to all of you, 2021 was a challenging year for us from a security perspective, particularly the impact of security on rail transport, copper theft, and its impact then on exports. Remember, if you lose 1 meter of copper cable on a railway system, it shuts the whole system. You've got to go back and repair that one section. It has a huge impact on the ability to export product. We've also been affected quite significantly by what we call the construction mafia. So the mafia pitching up, shutting down mining operations by putting in place roadblocks, getting the communities, piggybacking off the communities where some communities may have legitimate concerns, and then trying to shut down mines, and then trying to force the mines to give them 30% of their procurement contracts, et cetera, et cetera. So the whole construction sector has been through this. I can assure you that a lot of other sectors have been through it. And over the last 2 years, we've seen quite a big increase in it. We call this the construction mafia, but we have been working very closely with the South African Police Services, with the entire criminal justice cluster. We take a systemic approach to issues. We don't take a just one look approach, one component approach. And we are making some progress despite the fact that our security costs are something like 2.5 billion rand a year that we're spending on security, which if we didn't have to spend on security, we would be investing in the sector, so it's an opportunity cost for all of us. If I can just get onto the investment climate, We did have a mining charter judicial review judgment in favour of the Minerals Council. You'll notice that we've continued working closely with the Minister. The Minister decided not to appeal the judgment, and we've continued to indicate our strong commitment to the transformation process. And it's been interesting to really see in the detailed analysis of the progress that the industry's made. When you go to a colliery managers meeting, if you go to a mine managers meeting, to see the number of black South Africans that are running the industry shows the real transformation that's taking place. And we have briefed Parliament, we've briefed a number of political parties, to make sure that we're working on continuing our transformation journey, in a particular way. I've dealt with mine safety, I've dealt with vaccinations, and on the migrant labour side, let me deal with a couple of last points. We have committed to reducing our reliance on migrant labour. Through natural attrition, we've gone from 140,000 people from neighbouring countries in 2010 to about 40,000 people in 2021. And over time through natural... Say again?
40,000.
Yeah, 40,000 now, just slightly less than 40,000, Ed. So, and remember, the neighbouring countries like Lesotho and Mozambique, migrant labour has been an important component of their export earnings profile, etc., etc. We do have bilateral agreements with neighbouring countries, but through natural attrition and otherwise, there is obviously an approach towards phasing out migrant labour over time from the neighbouring countries. And we're doing it gradually, we're doing it in a sensible and economically feasible way as we go through the particular process. And Nix can also answer a few questions on it. On the State Capture side, we obviously are very pleased to have seen a number of the State Capture Commission reports coming out, now into the 4th edition. Now it's time to see some prosecutions of people, in particular those involved in anything affecting Eskom, Transnet and others. And so, watch this space. You will know that a number of our members, including the Minerals Council, did provide written input into the Zondo Commission. And we are hoping to see not only proper prosecutions taking place, but also hopefully some of the extorted funds somehow coming back into the fiscus, although that could be quite difficult. But we still do have a number of challenges on the corruption front. And when I say challenges, when you get into issues around mining licensing, et cetera, we're just making sure that if any companies have any particular challenges when they go and apply for a prospecting right or something like that, that we identify it and we take it back into the minister. And they've been quite open to engaging on those particular issues. So ladies and gentlemen, that's a quick snapshot. I probably haven't covered everything to a T. Stefina Mudau is our head of environment. She can answer any of the tough questions on our COP26 processes. You were there in COP26, and on our climate change commitments along with Nix Lesufi. Alan can answer any of the tough communication questions. Henk Langenhoven can answer any of the tough questions related to the economy. But let me fermer la bouche and let you go and answer the questions. Who's going to manage it? Alan, you're going to manage it. So you manage and then we'll answer the questions.
Thanks.
So I think a lot of our members remember, Brendan, that 90% of the exploration in South Africa is conducted by large-scale companies, whereas at a global level, 50% of global exploration expenditures are done by junior resource companies that are not located in South Africa. So our view is that a number of our members weren't invited to participate in the survey. Weren't invited. And that for the couple that were invited, they just didn't participate in the survey. So I can't answer that question. When it comes back to is it accurate or not, my particular view is that we mustn't be blind to the fact that there are some significant structural constraints that South Africa does face. It does take 352 days to get a prospecting right if it arrives on time. And a lot of that is environmental authorizations and those sort of things, which is not just a DMRE issue, it's a DFFE issue. It's a bit like trying to get an authorization for doing a solar plant. Why does it take 18 months to get that authorization? So when you look at the Fraser Institute survey, there are if I remember correctly, 18 different pillars that they work on. So it's socio-economic agreements, it's policy and regulatory certainty, it's the quality of the geological database, the quality of the infrastructure, etc. And in quite a few of those, South Africa scores relatively okay. But in quite a few of them, like security, we quite low down the tree. So I think what's important now is we actually had offered as the Minerals Council a couple of years ago to the DMRE to take them through the Fraser Institute survey in detail because we understand the survey. We have actually engaged the Fraser Institute survey before. And so now we've got this concept where we will engage over the next month or so in detail what the specific metrics are and what areas we can go back and influence. And then at the same time try and encourage South African companies to actually participate in the survey.
Do you, as the CEO of the Minerals Council, believe the Fraser Institute ranking of South Africa is correct or fair?
I think that the current ranking is not where we should be.
That's not what I asked. Is it fair?
Yes. Say again?
Is there any other kind of survey?
I'll get into that in a moment, Hilary. So do I believe that the position is 72 out of 85, is it? Was it 75? 74 out of 85, yeah. Sorry, I've got 79. 75 out of 84, bottom 10. I don't think that we should be ranked there. I think we should be basically where we were around about the 60 level, which is still in the bottom half. We were hoping that the exploration plan and a commitment by government to resolving the outstanding exploration licenses would be a step in the right direction, but that's still being worked on.
So it's not fair?
So in my view, it's not fair where we absolutely should be, but we're still in the bottom half,
Thank you.
in my view. Martin, how long have you got?
It's systemic. The short answer is systemic.
South Africa does have a significant implementation crisis. A significant number of government departments and parastatals were hollowed out. Capacity is a significant issue in almost every parastatal. Water boards, Eskom, Transnet, make no mistake, across the board. We're not rushing in to take over activities because government doesn't want us to. We've been working with them to open up the space for greater private sector participation, particularly in energy and increasingly in rail. And in our view, private sector participation is going to be the thing that changes the game for South Africa going forward. Because we're not convinced that the existing model is going to solve the issue. So private sector participation is the way that we can get ourselves out of the mess that this economy is in at the moment. I still believe that South Africa's got a 2% potential growth rate, only 2%. If you look at a typical endogenous production function growth model for South Africa, total factor productivity in the economy was negative for the last 3 years. Why? Because of network industries, rail, port, pipelines. And until we get much greater private sector participation in those areas, we're not going to solve the issue. From a business perspective, I can say this very confidently from a business perspective. From business, I was part of the 6 business leader team that met with President Ramaphosa in February to highlight what we are really looking for. And it's no longer about identifying what the specific solutions are. It's about implementing what's been agreed. And on the infrastructure side, what's been agreed is how we get much greater private sector participation on energy. And then on the rail side, trying to get the existing core stabilized. And there is a process underway to allow private sector participation in rail. At this stage, we're not convinced it's going to change the game, but that's a pressure point that we're pushing on government. The last point to make is that unlocking private sector capability in municipalities, there's not a single municipality that is in a mining related area that's not helped by the mining companies. But we can't take over the responsibility of the state. But we help with water services, with engineering services, with financial services and others to try and make sure that those communities and those municipalities are stabilized, because it also affects the morale in communities and particularly our workforce. So we're doing our bit, and I think we're doing it in a reach out partnership way with government. We're not saying, government, you don't know what you're doing. That's not our sentiment at all. What we're doing is going with constructive solution making to try and get practical outcomes. But it takes time. Martin, it's so on some of these issues, we've been working on them for 3 to 5 years. It takes time, and that's the unfortunate part. If we could have a little bit more of expedited processes in a number of areas, we can get certain things back on track a lot quicker.
And how do you fill that capacity within the government sector? How are they going to fill that?
Extremely difficult. I mean, listen, in certain areas we have seconded people in, but when it gets to regulatory issues like licensing, it's quite difficult for the Minerals Council or the mining companies to second people into government because there's a direct conflict of interest. But there are other ways that you can solve the challenges by getting Operation Vulindlela and government to make sure that in certain areas they are applying more capacity.
Okay. What's your feeling about dealing with the government? Are they actually going to come to the party at some stage?
Yeah, listen, I think it's a bit like capital projects, Brendan. In many of these things you have to double the time and double the cost in terms of if you're not managing it properly. Yes, we were disappointed that the exploration plan wasn't published when the Director General did indicate to us that they were taking it through the cabinet process. Why it took 12 months for them to take a document that had been engaged on through a cabinet process, we don't know. We don't control that process. So, and when it did go to cabinet, our understanding is that it had to go back a second time because there were certain things in the document that weren't agreed by the cabinet on the issue. So yes, we were unhappy that they didn't come out quickly enough on it. The fact that it's now been published and that there is a comment period is obviously constructive. We're not convinced of all the different areas in it. I'm not going to go into the detail of it right now. The minister said to us, listen, let's just implement. So he wants implementation when we haven't quite agreed on what exactly the plan is at the moment. But the point is that and there are certain things that have happened recently in terms of the Geosciences Act and some of the Geosciences Act requirements around what companies have to do from a provision of information point of view that we don't agree with, which we will engage the department on. But so that's a sort of work in progress. But let's see how the difficulty is. You've got the previous DG. He is no longer with the department, in my understanding, and so we don't have the finalized details yet on how this plan is going to be implemented in the next sort of stages that will take place. So yes, I mean, we didn't go out and shout that we didn't get the document in what we were looking at August last year, July, August. Took a little bit longer than that, but I guess that's just the pace of how government works at the moment. In terms of my job description, do I have eternal optimism as a streak? I've become known as Frank Baxter, so I'm kind of like a lot more direct than I've been in a long time, and we say it as we see it. I mean, and we are certainly disappointed that it could have come out a lot earlier. And now, if we're going to take a product like this out into the global marketplace, it's got to be something that we agree with. So we are looking closely at it.
I mean, let's face facts. The mining industry saved this country economically over the last 2 years.
Yes.
Through taxes.
Yes.
Story, okay?
And economic activity.
Okay. Now,
and employment.
Is there an appreciation in the government of that situation? Because from where I sit, there isn't. They still view you as a bunch of capitalist exploiters.
So before I come across to Hillary, just to say to you that there is a strong appreciation on the DMRE side, and it was part of the theme that was discussed yesterday at the African Mining Ministerial, although I'm not really at liberty to give any detail because it's a Chatham House rules discussion. There is a recognition, and I must say that every time that I see the Minister of Finance, he is very, his face lights up every time he sees me. It's not just because I'm friends with him, but because we have worked on how we get the sector to deliver the results. So I think there is a broader appreciation that in many of the different cabinet ministers and at the presidential level that mining has played a significant role, and that mining can play a greater role if we get the exploration work happening to the extent that we think it can. And so that's certainly a big focus area of ours. Thank you. So before Henk comes in, let me just say that so at the moment we still have, based on DMRE's numbers that were published last year in August, 4,500 outstanding prospecting rights, mining right renewals, mining authorizations and Section 11 programs that are still outstanding. We estimate that that's bottling up about 30 billion rands worth of investment. So if you look at the mining sector, just on our renewable energy projects, 65 billion, and on our capital that we've approved as mining companies, but we can't spend until such time as we've got those authorizations sorted out, That's nearly 100, it's 95 billion. That's just what we could bring to the table in addition. Now, Hillary, when we did the survey back in 2018, we asked our companies, what would companies spend in the next 4 to 5 years if South Africa got back into the top 25% of investment destinations in terms of the Fraser Institute survey, right? And the answer was we would see an 84% improvement in capital spend above existing plans, which would nearly double investment in the sector over that 4-year period. Obviously that has not transpired. The COVID lockdown, a number of other challenges that we're dealing with. I think we've become more focused on the legislation, on the more physical infrastructural constraints. Security have become more kind of like front of mind and taken a lot of our focus, as has our safety. I mean, nearly half of our people and half of our budget goes into safety and health in the Minerals Council, just as an example. So, Henk, do you want to add on the trends on fixed investment? Lisa? So the first point to make is that I think all state parastatals were affected by the state capture project. Transnet was one that was particularly affected. Remember, they ordered 1,064 locomotives. They had just over 500 were delivered. They have a number of those locomotives that are not operating at the moment. And that was, all of these things are the impact of the state capture project on Africa's biggest transport parastatal. Clearly there are a number of people that were removed by the state capturers because they were trying to fight against state capture in the organization. There are issues related to maintenance, management practices, a whole bunch of things within the team. And then more recently, over the last 2 years, and sorry, every time I look at you, the sun is shining right in my eyes. So in the last 2 years, Transnet has also been materially affected by the crime impact, particularly on copper theft, the criminal syndicates targeting them, et cetera, et cetera. So they have a new management team under Portia Derby and Caesar Kele. There's a process underway to deal with all the security-related challenges. So, for example, our coal mining companies have already committed 100 million rand towards helping with the security effort in a joint security process, and we're also working obviously closely with the security establishment to try and reduce the impact of copper theft on the network, copper and cable, signaling cable theft on the networks to get more reliability back into the system. But there is a shortage of locomotives, there is a shortage to a certain extent of rolling stock, and those issues are being looked at and addressed as we try and manage the process as they try and manage the process with our support, because again, putting things on truck is more expensive, and when you're sitting with 25 to 30 kilometer queues at the Lubamba border post trying to export chrome, it makes a lot of very unhappy truckers and a lot of very unhappy people. So again, it's a process, but it's unfortunately the state capture project was a 10-year project, and it's going to take a bit of time to turn that around. From our side, we are trying to work collaboratively, constructively with Transnet. We're having lots of discussions. There is progress being made in certain of the particular corridors, and let's hope that this year we'll start seeing some sort of reversion back to the targeted amounts that they're looking at. I think even before the KZN floods happened, we were seeing the export volumes not achieving target. So on the coal line, we were seeing export volumes some 10 to 20% lower than target. There were a couple of reasons for that. The KZN floods obviously have had a degree of an impact. But again, it's not just about the physical infrastructure that was affected. It's also about having sufficient rolling stock, having sufficient locomotives on those lines, et cetera, et cetera. And so there is a very big program to address them. I mean, historically, Transnet, because of all the local procurement rules, et cetera, it does take a while to procure critical spares. And so there has been a process underway in government to understand the issue and then to try and provide some exemptions so that the timelines to getting critical spares is shortened. Are we seeing the impacts of those feeding through? Our anticipation, and I've got to be careful because I've got Brendan sitting on my right-hand side here, is that we'll see some of those benefits of the exemptions feeding through towards the second half of the year, but that's And again, hopefully something else doesn't happen. What's interesting is that we've seen the crime incidents on the coal line going down. So we were in a discussion with the police and Transnet a month ago in a detailed discussion on this. We're seeing some of those incidents going down. But as you depress crime in one area, it pops up somewhere else. So their fuel line has been hit a few times, and we've seen a couple of extra attacks on precious metals facilities by these criminal syndicates. So you dampen it in one area, pops up somewhere else. And so we have been calling on government for a more systemic approach to dealing with the criminal syndicates, and that you'll see that that's becoming very much a theme that's coming through from our side and from government side, that it's no longer, you don't catch the runners are not the people, they're perpetrating the crimes, but they're not the masterminds. I think, put it this way, I think the JSE has gone through an exercise quite recently of trying to reduce their listing requirements and all the costs of listing, because listing a company is an expensive business. So I'm not as concerned about the transparency of what companies do, Martin. I think certainly the members of the Minerals Council, most of our member companies are listed, particularly the large-scale ones, in terms of the volume of production that we have in the Minerals Council. And if you look at the transparency of information that we provide, it's pretty good. So smaller coal companies not being listed is not really something that we've been focused on from a Minerals Council side. On the manganese side, listen, we've got a lot of manganese companies that are members, but quite a few of the bigger ones are obviously listed. So I'm not sure that they're opaque in the information flows. I think they still are fairly transparent.
You can see it in the numbers from SARS.
Yeah.
So the ones that were here are not a problem. The ones that weren't here.
So the ANC are even ahead of you. If I look at the NTC document, the ANC NTC document, it says these exploration companies, they should be encouraged in every way to list with the transparency.
So if you're looking about exploration companies, that's different. So on the exploration company side, there are only 12 companies listed on the JSE. There's 1,600 exploration companies listed on the Toronto stock market. Why? Because it's too bloody difficult to develop an exploration plan in South Africa. That's why the exploration plan is really an attempt to start moving us in the right direction. That's part of the process. They've got a massive flow-through share scheme. They provide significant fiscal incentives. We have engaged with the Treasury on the fiscal incentive side, but they haven't come to the party yet.